nobody wins in the oppression Olympics. I mean, nobody wins in the grievance games either. And what you tend to have is kind of often competing narratives of victimhood.
We just don't want the establishment anymore because we've trusted the establishment for so long and it didn't work for us.
Well, as a sociologist, I look at everything in society. You know, it looks at the problem of social order and the challenges to social order. And I think there are interesting developments, contradictions, problems with feminism as an ideology, but it's only one of the many trends that has brought about the kind of fragmentation that Melissa was describing. So I think we need to be a bit balanced on it. I think that contemporary feminism for young women today has got a lot of contradictions that are becoming quite glaring. You have, on the one hand, the aspiration towards independence and freedom, which is what I would see as the very positive aspect of feminism historically. Then you've got the aspect of it that's about fear, and fear of men specifically, which I think is becoming very dominant in today's culture because there is, young people have been brought up to be quite risk averse. And then you have the gender ideology problem, which is kind of very confusing to young women because it's making them feel uncomfortable about being women. So I think there's a lot of contradictions within feminism that are already coming out on their own. And what concerns me is that I think if we want to encourage people to, women and men, to have relationships with each other, to have children, to have families. As a society, we think this is a good thing. I think it would be very counterproductive to then look to restricting choices for women as a way of making that happen, because I think that will feed that sense of that idea that society is against you, that men are against you. So I think we just have to. What I'm trying to say is I think we need to be honest about some of the problems and tensions within feminism and its impacts on young people, but we should recognise it's not the only influence on them. There's a lot more going on.
Yeah, and Rebecca, I wanted to come to you next because Melissa's outlined the problem, as it were, but there's also a lot happening, especially, definitely in America, especially in Europe, where people are beginning to react in what we might consider a slightly more positive way to some of these trends. So I thought maybe you could outline a little bit about what's driving young women especially to seek an alternative.
So first of all, I just want to say that feminism is sort of the socialism of the sexes. So it gives you nothing. You sit there poor, aimless, without purpose at the end of the day. And I think that is what's driven when you look at young people today, you see the political situation where it's hard to get into a housing market, you can't buy your own place, you can't find a partner, dating is hard. You aimlessly change your so-called gender to fit in to a group. The groupthink has become stronger. This is ideology all across the board. It's not just politically, it's also the fight between the sexes, if you like. Something has shifted. So if you look at Scandinavia, I'm from Norway, so I spent a lot of time looking at Scandinavia. And also my very good friend and psychiatrist, Hannah Spear, she looks to women's health in Scandinavia. And it's interesting when you look at equality, because equality has been Scandinavia's main thing for years and years. Both Sweden and Norway compete in who's most equal, who has equality between the sexes. Mental health issues is a severe problem among women in Scandinavia. So over 2 million general practitioner visits in 2023 was mental health issues among women, okay? So with that said, there are positive aspects as well, yes, Jacob. You have young women fighting back against this feminist ideology or socialism between the sexes, whatever you want to call it. There's been a rising debate between women about tradwifing in Scandinavia for some absurd reason that just came in sideways from the sideline there. Women want to spend more time with their children. They want to have families. They're voting differently. And we see this in populist movements across Europe, not just in Scandinavia. They want to have a purpose and they want to have families. And I think it's a beautiful thing to see. So I think that's what I have to say about that.
That's great. And Georgina, I wondered if you could, you've looked a lot at how, obviously this is playing out in Hungary and some of the trends that are driving this, but also begin to broaden this out a little bit just beyond feminism and towards some of the other kind of trends and ideologies that you would identify from your research.
First of all, I would like to welcome everyone, and thank you for having me. If I had to answer this question in a nutshell, I would say that that various ideologies have a considerable influence on the way how young people think. But I also believe that it is more than important to shed light the reasons why these global ideologies seem to influence young people today more than in the past. We have talked a lot in recent years, we have talked a lot about the rapid development of communication technologies and their negative consequences, but I also think that one more important consequence is less often mentioned. And with the disappearing of the Gutenberg galaxy, the authority is slowly disappearing from the societies, which means that it also means that we have lost faith and trust in leaders and experts, and we can see that we don't believe the doctor, the teacher, the journalist, the scientist, or the politicians, because we are increasingly convinced that they don't know any more than we do when we read up the internet. And the prevailing view is that anyone can be an expert on everything. They just need to have access to the internet. But I am convinced that we are, when the internet and especially the social media first became widespread, many people were too optimistic and thought that this would improve the quality of democracies. But I am convinced that we have not achieved the democratization of the knowledge. Instead of authority is playing an ever small part in our lives. So it means that we used to listen to authority people on specific issues, believe the doctor, the teacher, the journalist. The world was more predictable because there were no parallel truths. But today, however, we find that societies are divided to extreme. And because this is the case, because there are fewer and fewer authority people whom we trust and whom believe, young people have become more vulnerable and influenced by different ideologies. And we can see that this is a global trend among young people.
Yeah. Some excitement. Paul, broadening this out a little bit, it's clear that there's, as some people have already alluded to, that there's the beginnings of a kind of populist-style revolt against some of the trends that the other panelists have talked about. What, in your opinion, is one of the more, or a couple of the more kind of important features that are driving this? Why are younger people kind of taking a look at the ideologies and ruling elites of our time and saying, no, actually, I want something different?
I think that it's the hypocrisy of the elites. It's like playing the same game but with different rules. We hear that the planet Earth is about to explode, that it's all our fault, that we all need to make an effort about it. Everyone need to make an effort about it except the elites. And this is something that the young people can no longer tolerate, this hypocrisy of elites. I'll give you a few examples. For example, we are being told constantly that we need to reduce our carbon footprint, while, for example, for the Conference of Parties 26 that took place in Glasgow 2021, over 400 private jets have been used just for this event. It represents 13,000 tons of CO2, which is the equivalent of the emissions of several thousand average European citizens, which is crazy. And also another case, we advocate for the protection of women while completely ignoring the issue of immigration. And a report that has been settled in 2023 by the Ministry of the Interior in France is explaining that in the region of Île-de-France, which is the region of Paris, on public transport, 63% of sexual assaults on public transport is committed by foreigners, which is crazy, while they represent 7% of the population in France. And while 87% of the victims of these sexual assaults are French nationals. So I think that the reality can't be hidden anymore by the elites, and the population is waking up. And so this hypocrisy can no longer be tolerated by young people.
Yeah, great. And Melissa, maybe reflect on some of the things that the panelists say, but also address, I mean, you staked out the problem very nicely and then also suggested that there is a beginning of a movement going on where people that want to, especially young women, in your case, are wanting to choose something else. So maybe you could tell us a bit more about that kind of fight back, but also feel free to address the comments from the panel.
Yeah, so there are a couple of comments. One of the issues that you brought to my mind is the Tradwives. And the first thing that I thought about when you mentioned these are young women who are basically saying, I'm going to go 100% traditional, and I'm not going to have a career at all, and I'm going to be at home with my baby because the feminist movement and the leftists who have brought in all the immigrants and have lied to us about the lockdowns and the COVID, and all these people have failed me, and therefore I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom. And that's, I would say, sometimes extremism can also breed extremism. And so you're almost starting to see this insane horseshoe that is really driven by behaviors that algorithms on the internet would drive, right? And so you're either in this camp or in that camp, and God forbid, look, I'm the CEO of PragerU. I have 180 employees. I have 3 children under the age of 13. It is doable. And what did I talk about? I talk about children, but I can also have a job. And so the point I want to make here is, I don't know how you talk about populism without mentioning Donald Trump. And so I happen to be an American, and I've studied carefully what was it that moved young people, what moved moms, right, suburban moms even included, towards voting for somebody like Donald Trump, who the media hated. You may have heard about the Trump derangement syndrome. And it was really 3 issues. And it was us Americans also looking at all of you Europeans and being terrified, especially if you're from the UK or France. And those 3 issues, number 1 is the economy, breadbasket, right? You graduate from college, you studied for a degree that a job doesn't even exist for, and you can't get a job, so the economy. Number 2, the issue of immigration. You look at France and London, we just don't even recognize it anymore, and we have some of it in Minnesota. And so immigration is the second big mover. And the third issue is the lie that's being told about males and females, everything I talked about up there. You take these 3 issues, these are not that political, they're actually cultural issues. If you think about it, these are very cultural issues, and I think these cultural issues are essentially what's driving young kids towards a more populist movement. They're less focused on politics, I think, but what they have in mind is culture.
Yeah, and Jennie, I wonder, I mean, we talked about or maybe I took for granted that there is actually a kind of revolt among certain young people against the status quo, but it's also a bit more balanced than that. There's a lot of kind of switching off going on. I mean, the Tradwives phenomenon that's already been talked about represents a kind of retreat. So do you think young people actually are becoming more radical, or is it sort of more complicated than that?
I think it's more complicated. And I think, I mean, when you research generations, you deal with sort of stereotypes, generalizations, and I'm aware they're generalizations, but the stereotype of the millennials, for example, was it was the sort of legacy boomers, the legacy technocrats. They just wanted, you know, the managerial kind of situation that, you know, business as usual. With the cohort known as Gen Z, I think they are much less kind of conformist. And I think there's two sides to that, because I think partly there is a sense of being more skeptical of authority. I mean, Georgina, you talked about some of these things. And so they might push back. But I think there's also a sense of we've lost them. You know, society has lost them. And you can see this in trends in education, and you can see it in kind of, you know, trends in all kinds of cultural debates. And I think, you know, young men and young women, I mean, certainly in the UK and Europe, there's quite a lot of evidence to show that they are actually going in different directions. And that's worrying as well. You know, that, you know, young men might towards the kind of populist, you know, right-wing positions. Young women are more kind of wanting to keep the sort of continuity. And then when you get that polarization politically that intersects with the cultural separation of young men and young women, then you think, well, this is a real problem. So I think we have to be kind of quite balanced on seeing, how should I put this? Not kind of imposing our own desire to see a reaction against the status quo onto young people and what they're experiencing, because I think that's something slightly different a lot of the time.
Yeah, Rebecca, do you want to reflect on this question as well, especially the thing that Jenny's brought up about it seems, especially in lots of European countries, this kind of divergence between voting patterns among young men and young women, but also just pick up, if you like, on the wider question of, is there actually a genuine kind of radicalism among younger people, or is it more difficult?
I think you touched on that, actually. The horseshoe effect is always a risk. You know, you have the two polar opposites to each other. Looking at Tradwives, for instance, it would be the sort of pietistic counterpart to the very liberal, I have no gender kind of attitude. I just want to comment on one thing that you said. Culture is a cultural issue, right? But what drives culture? Well, policies drive culture, and culture drives policies. And we have many examples of that in Norway, and Scandinavia in general, in terms of equality or gender policies or stuff like that. However, I think the radical young that we're talking about right now, and they're not radical at all. I think we need to keep in mind that generations are different. The radical generation, in my view, is in office all over Europe in governments. Those are the radicals, the 60s radical. The young people today, their radicalism is going to church and putting on a suit and a tie and looking back to find values in Christianity, in culture, family. So I'm not very afraid of the radicalism, even though we should keep in mind the horseshoe, because there are polar counterparts.
Yeah. Georgina, is this something you see in your research as well? Or?
So it's a tough call, because it depends on what we mean by this. I mean, the political participation of young people has changed a lot in the last couple of years or decades. And I think that the big question is how to interpret the online political activity. Does the online political activity have a real consequences or not? And how does online political activity affect the traditional forms of political participations, especially the elections or the culture of civil disobedience? But when analyzing the public and political interest of young people over the two last decades, we repeatedly found that the passivity was one of the most important characters of young people, alongside the conformity and uncertainty. However, I should tell that according to the recent Hungarian youth research, we also see that 2/3 of young Hungarians are potentially mobilizable for parliamentary elections, and the political interest is increasing, and which can be attributed to the consequences of the COVID pandemic, because due to the fact that young Hungarians talked more about political issues with their families during the lockdown. And possible motivating factor for the voter turnout could be that young Hungarians value those forms of political participations which which are visible, which are tangible, and delivers results as quick as possible. But even in 2020, the last Hungary Youth Research, young people didn't want to turn over the status quo, and they didn't become radical in political way. Your sense?
Yeah, Paul, this is a similar question I want your thoughts on, because the example you gave of the hypocrisy that people see about people going to climate conferences and flying private jets, that can kind of go in both ways. You can either say the whole climate movement is a load of nonsense, or you can demand that they no longer take the private jets, and you'd be like Greta Thunberg, who refuses to take a plane and only travels by boat and things like this. And similarly, if you look in, say, European cities, you have marches for traditionally left-wing causes like Palestine. It's like they're still full of young people. It's not like, so what do you think? Is it slightly more complicated than, or is there actually a notable kind of shift to the right or conservative parties among young people?
I think that the status quo, you won't find any young people who will tell you, yeah, I'm for the status quo. Have you tried going into these protests and asking young people, pro-migrant demonstration, for example, like that they actually support the status quo? They think differently. They think that they are still the rebels in May 1968 in Paris. They think that they are subversive. They think that the state is trying to silence them. That's not the case. The difference is... So I think that the status quo is rejected by both sides of the political spectrum. The difference is that leftists maybe truly think, or maybe they don't want to see, that they are actually supported and even financed by the states and by the status quo itself, which is very convenient. A phrase I really like is that I truly think that conservatism is the new punk rebellion. And I think that we see many more young leftists than young conservatives, because young conservatives are quiet for fear of being cancelled. Cancelled by who? Cancelled by their family, cancelled by their friends, cancelled by also their colleagues. I can take my example. My first job, I was deputy director of events for Eric Zemmour during the French presidential campaign in 2022. And I was hiding it from my mom because I knew in advance her reaction. And so her first reaction when she found out by herself, because I was going in suit and tie as a very traditional and fascist guy in Paris to work. So she found out, and first thing she cried. And then she was hiding me and my job from our family, from her colleagues, from her friends. And she would rather say that I was unemployed at home. Really, I mean, she was rather saying that I was employed at home rather than saying that, my son got a nice job and he's on TV every week, you know? And I lost like 80% of my friends. And even when I was working out of the political field, I remember when I was hired, my different managers were telling me, we hire you because you got great experience in event management, but please don't tell other colleagues what you've done and find something else to blur your experience, because it might cause trouble in the company. So yeah, that's it. We are just hidden for now.
Yeah. And that's something maybe you can reflect on, Melissa, from the kind of Trumpist moment recently, where it seemed that suddenly there was almost like a cascade effect where some minority people who were wearing the MAGA hats, suddenly it became a signal of respectability, and then it kind of allowed people to finally start to throw up some questions that they'd been kind of sitting inside them for a long time, and so suddenly things can shift kind of quite quickly.
Their whole system broke because Americans realized that they were lied to. The first thing that Donald Trump broke was the media. And when a politician, when the left can't control the media anymore, it's real hard because all the lies that were told about him and about any of the Democrats' opponents were not believed anymore by the minorities included. And so what happened was after the lockdowns and COVID, when Americans realized that they were lied to, and then they were lied to that the borders are completely safe, but then we found out that in 4 years, 11 million illegal immigrants entered our country. That's more than this entire country entered in 4 years into our country. And so the dam broke. The dam broke because we realized that we were lied to, and it didn't matter what color skin you have or what your genitalia was. It doesn't matter anymore because at the end of the day, you have children to raise in this country, you want to live freely in this country. And that is really what sparked that massive change where they said, listen, we just don't want the establishment anymore because we've trusted the establishment for so long and it didn't work for us. We are poorer, we're not as safe, our education system is broken, our healthcare is broken, it's broken. And so in people who didn't even like Donald Trump for a very long time ended up voting for him because they really wanted an authentic alternative and not an establishment person who just reads off a teleprompter and the media just goes and supports even while knowing that they were lying.
Yeah, no, I think that's entirely right. But Jennie, one question I know you'd probably want to reflect on, but haven't had time to yet, is this question of can some of the radicalism that we might see among younger people in rejecting the status quo, that sometimes can kind of almost turn into its mirror image. So you have people that have been rejecting, say, the identity politics of our elites that celebrates all these kinds of different racial identities. People turn around and say, well, you know what, I'm now going to start celebrating my white identity. And all the rest. Is there a danger of some of that coming too?
I think there is. I think that there is a brittleness to a lot of these discussions. I mean, you know, the phrase nobody wins in the oppression Olympics. I mean, nobody wins in the grievance games either. And what you tend to have is kind of often competing narratives of victimhood where, I mean, so for example, you know, one might look at the position occupied by liberal left ideology in universities and everything and think, well, these people are in charge. But it's really important to understand that the people think that they're not in charge. They think that they still think they are a beleaguered group, you know, kind of fighting against the man or whatever. And then you get the flip side of that, which is the people who feel kind of beleaguered because they're conservative or whatever. And I think this is understandable, but I think it's because we're having to work out a new kind of language and framework to discuss these things. You know, there's been at least 30 years of depoliticization, you know, and what you're dealing with now is, whether it's young people or older people, trying to kind of remake a political discussion, and that's not going to happen overnight. So I think it's, you know, it's important to be kind of excited about changes, but also to be sometimes a bit cautious about kind of fueling one side or the other so we don't end up with your, you know, horseshoe problem, because then you end up with, you know, older people not talking to younger people and men not talking to women, and, you know, you just end up with these kind of very, you know, standoffs which are then reflected, I think, rather than caused by the internet and social media. So it's kind of getting that balance right, really.
Yeah. And Rebecca, and I guess the same question now to the rest of the panel, although quickly because we're going to wrap shortly, but looking ahead a little bit, what do we think that some of the kind of key battles should be that, I mean, I don't count myself among the young people, but what are the kind of key issues that we should be looking to highlight, or where do we think there's actually a big opportunity to shift the argument around or among younger people? Like when, for example, when we're talking on social media or we're writing reports or whatever, but what are those kind of issues that you think have a big chance of both resonating among young people, but also addressing some of this gender divide that we've talked about?
I don't think there's just one thing. I think that's a very complex topic to talk about because there's so many things intertwined in what drives people. I think I love the fact that younger people are looking for value and identity, again, in other places than politics. Because I think, my personal opinion is, a lot of people use politics as their identity, as they're maybe not religious or maybe not have other values in their life. I don't know what your experience are in that, but when you meet someone, they're very political, identical, motivated, right? So I think there needs to be come through policy, through democracy, through voting, that we can change policy to help younger people get started in life in terms of buying a home, finding a family, having the values, and they need to search for the values in places where they can be found and not in politics. And then also just look out for the mines, that is, the horseshoe where, as you touched on, where men don't talk to women and I guess white people don't talk to black people, or all these radical things.
Yeah, I like that. I like the idea that you need like more rounded people, that some of the prevalence of identity politics or wokeism or is precisely because these people have got nothing else to kind of hang their identity around, and that they, as you say, they can't get a house, can't get a job, all the usual markers that you might go through in this process have suddenly become blocked off to people. So part of our job has to be trying to build a society where it's possible to develop some more normal, as it were, kind of identities. But Georgina, your reflections on this as well. What are some of the kind of big issues you'd like to see us address?
It seemed to me, based on our data or other international research, that young people are become more open to global issues, and they are continue to show a strong interest in social issues which have a direct impact on their lives, with the focus of immigration, climate change, sustainable development, or the innovations in digital world. And actually, a survey was conducted by the Youth Research Institute at the beginning of this year among Hungarian and American citizens between the ages of 15 and 39, on the nationwide and representative sample of 1,000 people. And in this survey, we asked young people about what they thought we should talk more about in public, and we have got a very similar answers, at least the first couple of topics, because young American and Hungarian people think that we should talk more about the future, the mental health, and the climate change. So we can see that these are the main topics that young people are most interested in. But of course, it doesn't mean that young people are not also interested in domestic politics, but it means that there are several global issues which successfully appeal to young people. So I think that we should reflect on this uncertainty and unpredictable future of young people.
Yeah, Paul, your reflections on this, but one thing that we somehow haven't mentioned, which I'd actually like to get your thoughts on, because this is something that me and Paul, who work together, we talk about quite a lot in the office, is the sense that actually a lot of what drives some of this rebelliousness is just that life has become less fun for young people. I mean, you live through the lockdowns. Maybe the scene in cities isn't quite what it used to be. You're policed as to what you can say on the internet. You can't make jokes. Isn't there also an element of part of opening the space up for young people to become slightly more interesting, rounded people is also giving them the freedom to experiment as well?
Yeah, there are different topics. I agree about you that life for young people nowadays seems just like funless. I don't even know if this word exists, but For me, the first topic is just security. It's like the base. If you're afraid to be stabbed in the street randomly, then like this is like the very biggest base of the Maslow pyramid needs. If you're scared for your life, you can think about climate change. You can think about future. You can think about investment. And so I would say security first, which is linked, of course, to my immigration. And I would say also the second is the cost of living. Basically, as you explained, the real estate market just crashed. It's the same for me. I'm thinking about buying real estate, but I can't do it alone. I need to have a partner for it. I need my partner to be up for it. And then what if I want, for example, my dream is to be able to tell my wife one day, we would like to have children, and I would like you to be able to choose if you want to work or not. Not having the need to work, but having the ability to choose. So I agree with you, we have less fun, we have electrical cars, we don't have big V6 Mustangs anymore, we have a lot of taxes, a lot of everything, but for me the main topic is security.
Yeah, and Melissa, your final thoughts.
Chaos. So my final thought is there is a solution to a lot of the problems, the non-common sense, the chaos that we're living in, and that is ultimately understanding human nature. I think that you could go to the Bible to understand human nature, even if you're not a religious person. I think you would agree that it is a manual for humankind that has endured. You know, when I went through education school, they would say children don't come with a manual, and I would say, well, yes, they do. The Bible is kind of a manual. It really explains human nature. And so many of these answers of, you know, the male-female separation, the understanding of why people are so complacent, right? Why aren't they fighting back? Well, I've always said most people will wait for others to do the fighting for them, or they'll only start fighting once it's too late. And that's human nature, right? It's also human nature throughout all mankind that young people don't have fun all the time. It is human nature. And so I think ultimately, how do we solve this? We go back to understanding human nature, and we do accept biology and reality and all of those things, and we go back to the basics. And from the basics, we rebuild. We rebuild away from the lies. All the lies that we've been told have been anti-human nature. If you follow human nature, you can rebuild society because you understand what the human needs are, and you can understand what to expect of humans. But young people, Gen Zers, even millennials, have been taught everything that is anti-human nature. And that's why I think there is so much discombobulation and confusion around all of these different issues. Sovereignty, national sovereignty included.
Seems just like funless. I don't even know if this word exists, but for me the first topic is just security. It's like the base. If you're afraid to be stabbed in the street randomly, then like this is like the very biggest base of the Maslow pyramid needs. If you're scared for your life, you can think about climate change. You can think about future. You can think about investment. And so I would say security first, which is linked, of course, to my immigration. And I would say also the second is the cost of living. Basically, as you explained, the real estate market just crashed. It's the same for me. I'm thinking about buying real estate, but I can't do it alone. I need to have a partner for it. I need my partner to be up for it. And then what if I want, for example, my dream is to be able to tell my wife one day, we would like to have children, and I would like you to be able to choose if you want to work or not. Not having the need to work, but having the ability to choose. So I agree with you, we have less fun, we have electrical cars, we don't have big V6 Mustangs anymore, we have a lot of taxes, a lot of everything, but for me the main topic is security.
Yeah, and Melissa, your final thoughts.
Chaos. So my final thought is there is a solution to a lot of the problems, the non-common sense, the chaos that we're living in, and that is ultimately understanding human nature. I think that you could go to the Bible to understand human nature, even if you're not a religious person. I think you would agree that it is a manual for humankind that has endured. You know, when I went through education school, they would say children don't come with a manual, and I would say, well, yes, they do. The Bible is kind of a manual. It really explains human nature. And so many of these answers of, you know, the male-female separation, the understanding of why people are so complacent, right? Why aren't they fighting back? Well, I've always said most people will wait for others to do the fighting for them, or they'll only start fighting once it's too late. And that's human nature, right? It's also human nature throughout all mankind that young people don't have fun all the time. It is human nature. And so I think ultimately, how do we solve this? We go back to understanding human nature, and we do accept biology and reality and all of those things, and we go back to the basics. And from the basics, we rebuild. We rebuild away from the lies. All the lies that we've been told have been anti-human nature. If you follow human nature, you can rebuild society because you understand what the human needs are, and you can understand what to expect of humans. But young people, Gen Zers, even millennials, have been taught everything that is anti-human nature. And that's why I think there is so much discombobulation and confusion around all of these different issues. Sovereignty, national sovereignty included.